Sean, I'm going to take the liberty of the first question. Sean, with the changes in the markets as we see them at the moment, where do you think the real opportunities are going forward, and where do you think the real risks are? What are you looking for? What would you be looking to capitalize on, and where would you be looking to stay away from?
Okay, so there's a quick answer to your question. I think I'll give you one thought or one idea, which I guess is it's quite interesting coming here to the UK, which I guess is a very overbanked centre of hub and activity. Although there are very few banks. I was looking today again at bubbles that represent what the banks here in the UK were worth before the crash and kind of what they're worth today. I mean, there's an enormous gap. But if you guys speak to anyone kind of looking to get a mortgage on their home, I think that's a process which makes it unbelievably difficult because of the mess that the banks are in. I think, for example, in the UK now, there's a wonderful opportunity to set up something which is fresh, has got no legacy, and which is a pure mortgage lender. We've got a wonderful system here in the UK where the government guarantees £85,000 for every depositor. So to be able to attract deposits, it's not easy to open a bank. I'm not saying it's a simple thing, but it's quite interesting that in the midst of a banking crisis, start a bank. I'm making that sound a little bit easy, but if you want to take a generational view, if you want to do something which is going to make an enormous difference over the next 15 years, that's what I would do. If I could raise the money from my shareholders and I can put money into something, amidst all of the crisis, I would look to start a bank here. I mean, there are many other things we can do, but I guess that's part and parcel of looking through the crisis. I guess one of the things which I've learned from both from a practical experience point of view as well, something really to avoid in almost all occasions, which is rich coming from someone who says, let's start a bank and lend people money, is the idea of being leveraged or over-leveraged. And I think if I look at all the properties we've been involved in as a business, it's not purely the quality of the property that's determined whether you've survived or not. It's been a case of how much leverage you have. Buildings that weren't great buildings, that were not over-leveraged, you've survived with them. Great buildings which are over-leveraged, you haven't. If we'd taken more debt as a business in order to buy Stenham, we could have gone bust. Private individuals I know who were wealthy before the crash didn't lose it all because their asset value collapsed, it was because they were over-leveraged. So I think ultimately the ability to stay in the game, the ability to actually not blow yourself out the water, to be leveraged at the right level, whatever that level might be, to be able to withstand whatever shocks come to the system is a very important part of staying alive in the current environment. The opportunities that present themselves, I think there's a lot of common sense opportunities. I think there are fantastic businesses that are around that are yielding very good dividends and very good yields. They might not be exciting. You might not need to look at your monitor every day and work out, are they going up or are they going down? But you think about it, you can go and buy a 10-year government bond which will yield you probably 1.7%. It will guarantee you earning 1.7% over the next 10 years. Or you can buy into a quality business which is probably going to pay you a 3, 4 or 5% dividend yield and grow over the next 10 years, where the government bond will only ever give you your money back. So the opportunity in the current environment, whilst everyone is taking no risk, putting their money into fixed income, being in an environment where they actually are too scared to do anything, I think there's a wonderful opportunity to invest in real businesses, giving you real yield, investing in real assets, giving you real yield. And I think part and parcel of what we as an investment business are doing is trying to look past the next week, the next month. It's what we call quarteritis. Everyone used to be quarteritis. Every quarter you have to look at the results. It's now monthlitis. It's now almost weekly estimates you've got to look at. Try and look through that. If there's any way you can afford to do that, they say in investing there's only one free lunch, and that's diversification. I think there's another free lunch. And that free lunch is time. If you have the benefit of time, if you can actually afford to actually wait through a crisis, you can buy good quality assets, sit on them, they'll give you a yield, and I think you'll do very well without that yield.
Anyone else for questions?
Yeah. In the financial crisis, what sold as triple-A securities. And I know the financial services industry employs a lot of well-educated people, a lot of bright, clever people. So how were so many people fooled into thinking that these were top-quality securities that are as safe as government bonds, but they were in fact junk loans?
So did everyone hear the question?
Yeah.
I must be honest, that's beyond me. I'm not quite sure how everyone did get fooled into it. I think the honest answer is that many people knew that it was junk, and most of the people who actually were involved in the production of it didn't quite believe their own part in terms of what they were doing. It is a bit of a game of musical chairs. As long as the music's playing, no one's out. So as long as the market didn't collapse, it was going up. That might sound like a trite thing to say, but I don't honestly believe that people who were involved in that type of industry can turn around and say they had no idea. That being said, you look back and you can read papers and you can read all sorts of research which shows that if you take, if you have 10 dogs in here and all 10 of them make a mess on the carpet, and you kind of repackage those 10 things into different layers and whatever else, the first layer comes out as a diamond. That's the theory, right? Sorry to use such a crude example, but that kind of is, and mathematically it's possible to actually prove that. It's possible to prove that at the very tip of it, you're actually going to get a diamond. So, I think that's part of why there's such a reaction, as we've seen, in terms of people having made so much money off something that people can't actually believe that the sellers believed it. And you've seen the class action suits, you've seen the FSA, you've seen the SEC coming after the banks for mis-selling product. And at the end of the day, unfortunately, we live in a world where it's very much driven by the bonus that you take home. It's very much driven by the ability to actually sell something. And I think part and parcel of what the current swing of the pendulum all the way towards regulation is trying to do is cut down on those activities. The problem with that is that it's actually cutting down on good activities from good, honest people who actually are trying to put proper product out there. So in trying to actually stop some of the unscrupulous practices, that's actually strangling business as well. The reaction is completely understandable, and I'm not sure that regulation is necessarily going to be the answer. I think better morals and scruples and ethics is always a better answer than trying to regulate people and tell them what to do.
So if you were just finishing university now, or actually just finishing school now, and you're back in South Africa or even here, what advice would you give? What would you be looking to do? Do you think there's been a structural change in the way that the industry sector is moving towards in terms of regulation and capital constraints and the way that people are thinking? Or do you think this is like a short-term blip and you'd still advise people to go into finance, or would you say there's probably better routes to being successful?
Look, finance is not going away. The whole service model, whether it's finance, whether it's IT driven, is a very much part of our lives. The idea that it's more heavily regulated means, funny enough, you employ more people in the industry. From a compliance perspective, from a legal perspective, what you are seeing, and I've seen it practically, I've seen people who are engineers who are involved in hedge funds going back into engineering. I've got an architect friend of mine who was working at a hedge fund who's going back into architecture. I guess most people who are doing any sort of quantitative MBA were ultimately going into. So I think at the margin you will find there's a change. I guess it's probably better for society if engineers build bridges rather than building structured products. But I'm not sure how long the current situation lasts. I think it's more than a year or two. And it's not just a case of weak markets. I think there's a whole structural change that does need to take place. Your question in terms of what would you do? Would you go into finance? Would you go into finance? I'm someone, as I said, that was lucky enough to follow my passion. I guess that's part and parcel of what has led me to enjoy doing what I do. So if I speak to real youngsters, I would say try and work out what you actually want to do in life. The one bit of advice that I give to anyone who asks me about starting a career is is that I got a tremendous boost working for a fantastic firm and getting a lot of incredible training early on. So even for an entrepreneur looking to get into their own business, getting the right start and the right training and the right mentorship before they actually kick off on their own is something that I would advise many youngsters. I mean, someone who's talented is going to do it on their own anyway. But the ability to actually learn from others and put yourself, it's not always easy. I mean, to get a job is hard enough. Certainly in the South African context today, it's very difficult to come out of university and find the right job. But finding the right business mentors, putting yourself in a hard-working, ethical environment, learning what it is to actually do the work properly, is a big part, I think, of what actually works for people who ultimately go on their own and are successful.
How do you see the future of South Africa and Africa and the opportunities of this continent in general?
Is the question South Africa and Africa in general?
And Africa, both, yes.
Did you say in the whole continent?
Yes, the whole Africa.
I'm probably someone who is more optimistic on South Africa than most South Africans who are living in London. So I guess asking a South African living in London what they think of South Africa, they're really that optimistic. Why aren't you in South Africa? I do have to disclose that I still have my home in South Africa. I still have my office in South Africa. In the 5 years since we bought into this business and traveling back and forth, I've been back 42 times. And some of that was during the time of the financial crisis, some of it's to have wonderful holidays in South Africa. But I'm one of those people that actually think South Africa does have potentially a very good future. One of the reasons that I think that is the case is that I think it has the ability to not follow what to date I would call the African example of countries that have failed to take the opportunity that they have. Zimbabwe would be a great example of a country that, I mean, Zimbabwe at one stage had the highest literacy rate in the world. I mean, they got to a point where you had school kids who could quote Chaucer. It was a very strong policy in Zimbabwe. And they took that, didn't help in terms of engineering and maths, so it might have been a little bit misguided. But unfortunately, I think the real potential for Africa as a whole is starting to be recognized in terms of comparing it to other emerging markets. If you want to actually look at the potential, we've got investments in businesses in Africa. There's no doubt that there's a very exciting opportunity in one of our businesses, the power generation business. So power in Africa is completely underdeveloped. Over the next 10 or 15 years, it's very hard not to make money if you're running a good business doing things like that. You see it on the consumer side, you can see it on the banking side. Africa is a huge opportunity. It relies on political stability, and I guess part and parcel of Africa's history is that there hasn't been that level of political stability. Personally, I am probably more worried about South Africa's political stability than any other stage that I've been as a 43-year-old South African. It's only over the last year that I've probably thought to myself, is it possible that I'm wrong and that politically things can go the wrong way? And then I have to ask myself the question, am I thinking that because I'm living in London thinking the way someone in London thinks, or is that the reality? I'm not sure. As with everything in life, where there's potential for a lot of negativity, Africa can go the wrong way. The potential on the upside is there as well. So it is a frontier situation. If you do well, you can do incredibly well. You just need to have the appetite for that type of risk, I would think. But I'm bullish on South Africa. I wouldn't translate the same thing to Africa as a whole, but I'm very bullish on South Africa long term.
At what stage in your working life were you happiest and you realised that it was for you? And on the flip side, when at kind of a liberty or an invest state, did you realise, right, this is not for me, I need to move on?
Yeah. Question?
You can repeat.
Okay, at what stage? Tell me if I'm wrong. At what stage in my life, career, was I happiest? This is fantastic. And at what stage did I actually say, well, I actually want to move on and do something different, whether at my original job, liberty, or investing? My answer is probably sort of a nondescript, strange one. And probably happened in the first few weeks of working, where I actually sat in front of my screen, and I had all my prices in front of me, and I had this data all over the place. And as kid, I suppose as someone that I used to at lunch at school, I used to go and use a ticky box. No cell phones in those days. I used to use a ticky box to phone my stockbroker to kind of trade. Which I guess most kids don't do at school, but that's what I did. At university, I subscribed to a service called Beltel, which was a modem probably the size of this table. And you used to dial in and type in the share price. You used to wait 5 minutes because you make yourself a cup of tea and the share price would come up. And it just struck me sitting there actually at a professional firm. I think I just got my paycheck that day as well, but I was getting paid to do something that I previously paid to do. It was like a complete flip over. So that to me was almost a surreal euphoria, saying I'm doing what I want to be doing and I'm getting paid to do it. Interestingly enough, I mean, the listing of the business was a highlight of my life, and at some strange level a low point, because I remember being interviewed for radio that evening. We had a listing party. It was a closed party where we kind of invited our parents and our close friends. There were maybe 100, 120 people. I remember sitting there and thinking, if I'm being honest, I'm actually going to tell the guy this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. The business is not worth this. And if someone opened it, it's like what you were saying, do these guys really believe their own bullets? That's what I really wanted to say. And here I am back on air having to say, look, it's a wonderful company and things are great and we've got so many good prospects. So it's quite difficult when you're actually trying to, maybe saying you're not quite 30s, still telling the truth. But from a business perspective, what I found quite difficult from then on was living in the listed world, and being part of that environment means that you've got to colour the truth somewhat. I haven't enjoyed the listing environment because of that, where you kind of need to put a spin on everything that you do, because if you don't, and it gets interpreted the wrong way, it gets said the wrong way, it affects lives, it affects jobs, it affects. So it turns it into a very different game once you're a listed business. If you offered me now, I want to know one of the happiest days of my life would be to still have my business, but to have it in an unlisted environment. That would make it a lot more enjoyable than being under sort of the scrutiny of. I mean, if you want to, you can work out, you can go look at exactly to the cents how many shares I have in the business, what my net worth is in the company, what I've got paid every year for the last 2 years, what my salary is, what my bonus is. My life is open to you on that basis. Is that what I really want? So the listing side, whilst it was a childhood or childish dream and made us all very wealthy, I'm not for 1 second saying I would reverse anything, but it comes and it came with something which I think has been a very difficult thing for me in my personal life to live with. And that element of it, the public scrutiny, the nonsense you kind of almost have to put up with and put out is not quite what I prefer if I was taking that part of it.
So sure, there are obviously many good reasons to stay in London. There are obviously many good reasons to go back home. I think that for a lot of South Africans in this room, people all over the world, you look at the UK economy, you look at this highly mature economy, which every high street's got the same shops. 80% of the deposits in 4 banks, 90% plus mortgages with, say, 5 banks. There's such enormous barriers to entry for an entrepreneur in any sector. If you were an entrepreneur and wanted to do something outside the financial sector, or in the financial sector, would you do it in London, or would you go back home?
Listen, there's a wonderful challenge to do it here. As I said, if you kind of want to confound the experts. We started a home loan business in South Africa in 1999. So, as with many of the things we did in our business, we plagiarized something that was working brilliantly somewhere else in the world. That's been the model that I've followed, is go and find something that's a real successful business and dig as deep as you can to find exactly how they run it. And we did that. We took a business called Aussie Home Loans, which has been incredibly successful breaking into the Australian mortgage market. And we started a business in South Africa called SA Home Loans. It wasn't very original, but we called it SA Home Loans. And it's interesting, you talk about the dynamics of the South African market, much smaller, whatever, but 4 big banks owning 100% of the mortgage markets. There were no government guarantees on deposits, so no one's going to put money with a small bank. 100% of deposits were effectively with those banks. People said there's no way you can start a mortgage originator in South Africa and compete with these big four banks. Today, SA Home Loans, I think, has 7 or 8% of the market. We got out a few years after we got in at about 20 times money.
How did you find yourself?
How did we find it?
That's the issue. In this place,
So
a bunch of South Africans going to try to fund it.
that's a story on its own. We funded it until Peregrine ran out of money, and then I started funding it until I ran out of money. I worked probably 25 hours a day. I found JP Morgan, who came in as kind of a white knight in that business. They brought Standard Bank into the business. The banks that actually gave us funding lines blackmailed us because they said, if you don't give us 51% of this business, we're pulling our funding lines. We didn't give them 51% of the business. They pulled their funding lines. So I think the ability to compete in any environment, I mean, what did help me, there's no doubt, was being in South Africa and that I'd had business contacts, that I'd done good, honest business with JP Morgan before. They trusted me. I was able to go and, almost cap in hand, ask them to come in, but on what is a good investment. That would be much harder for someone who's a new entrant into the London market. Where do you go? How do you do it? But you know what? I think it can be done. I mean, there might be a fraction of a chance that we start a bank and we do very well in London, but if in 10 years' time we do it, you'll turn around and say, you know what, I was actually at a talk and we spoke about doing it. And the one problem that we have as a business is that we dominate in some of the sectors that we're in South Africa. We started the first hedge fund in South Africa. Again, when people said, well, hedge funds are dangerous, we started the first hedge fund. We were the first prime broker in South Africa. Again, just copying models that worked elsewhere and going behind the best people in the country we could find to do that. It's not that complicated a model in doing that. The problem is that the entire South African hedge fund industry is 30-something billion rand. So it's a £2 billion, a $3 billion industry, $4 billion. That's the size of a medium-sized firm. So where would you rather make a success of your business if you really want to think big? Of course it's here. The South African market's a very limited market. You can make a living, you can do really well, but when you get to a certain size, when you are a certain percentage of a market in South Africa, which we've thankfully grown to, the challenge has to be outside, where it's a much bigger and wider world.
Sean, straddling 2 continents, having travelled up and down 42 times with a lovely family, running 2 businesses, how do you find time to actually give back to the community, to actually focus on your charitable work?
So time is my biggest constraint, there's no doubt. I think what has happened over the years is that, and it's an interesting thing, no matter how stressed I am in the business, and no matter how big issues appear to be in the business, getting involved in communal affairs and actually seeing real hardship, real difficulty, people who struggle to put money on the table, on the dining room, food on the dining table, people who don't have money for a wedding, people who don't have, getting back to reality and kind of realizing that the fact that your hedge funds are actually only up 8% for the year and everyone else is at 12 is not the end of the world. So I find it actually a very useful leveler. It's a wonderful way of getting back to reality, and also in a strange way the frustration of being in business, being in a corporation where we now have almost 600 people, being in an environment which is highly regulated. I almost feel that I'm less effective now than I've been at any time in my Peregrine career. I think the environment kind of almost hems you in. Somehow being involved in communal affairs actually lets you do real stuff. For me, that's what it does. It actually, you can make a tangible difference, not just by giving money, but being actually actively involved. So for me, it's actually a very enjoyable part of what I do, and I guess the same way as I pursued my hobby 20 years ago, being involved in something where you can make a positive difference in someone's life, and it's actually fulfilling for you and it's helping someone else, it gives me personal fulfillment. I mean, there is a corollary to that. This all sounds wonderful and warm apple pie and whatever else, is that I got to a stage where, when I was able to extricate myself a bit more from the business, and I've got some very good people. So I've got a CEO in Joburg and a CFO in Cape Town, CFA in Joburg, great people surrounding me. I thought I'd spend more time in the charity world. And it's interesting that when you kind of get quite deep into many, many organizations, you find that it's not very different from business. That the ego's involved, and that the agenda's involved, and that so it's not something where you say, great, I'm going to get involved in that, and it's altruistic and everyone's doing it for the right reasons. So part and parcel, I guess, as with everything in life, is actually do your investigations well, explore what you want to get involved with, and when you do that, find it, go with your heart. Find something you actually are passionate about, and then it's very easy. The time will happen. You don't have to find the time. If you find something that you enjoy being involved with, if at 2 o'clock in the morning it doesn't feel like a hardship.
think we'll take one more question, and then sure, we'll take one more question, and then sure.
I must say that you're extremely, extremely fortunate to have found something that you like, you're passionate about, and to have gone and excelled in it. It's something I think that many people would be jealous of. If you wish to comment on that, you may. My question is, you said that after, I think it was Investec, you gave yourself 1 year to go on, establish something and succeed. How important do you think it is to be sort of mission orientated and to dictate the time frame?
Okay. I'll comment very briefly on your first point, which is I do consider myself extremely fortunate. I don't for 1 second ascribe any of that to my own doing or being. I just happen to have done something I love and done well financially from, so I'm very grateful for that. Time frame wise, again, it's so interesting if you just kind of look at it as a soundbite and you say, well, you gave yourself 1 year, well, that's really goal orientated, and if it didn't succeed, you're going to get out. When you just dig a little bit deeper, the reason I gave myself 1 year is that the Australians weren't that efficient at processing my papers. So if they were going to take 6 months, I might have given myself 6 months. Interestingly enough, and again, talk about blessings being curses and curses blessings, I bought a house, my wife and I bought a house in South Africa in May of 1994. The election was in April of 94. So the month after the election there was a euphoria. It just so happened to be the month or two after we got married, so that's when we bought our home. I tried to sell our house. We couldn't get within 70% of the price we could get 70% of the price we paid. So the constraint of a year, or the game plan of a year, really relates to how long our papers would take, and the fact that we thought it was going to take us a year to sell our home. From a business perspective, when we set up new businesses, I think any business that you give yourself too little time, you run the risk of just missing. You know, it's kind of like the joke with the guy who invented a drink to be better than Sprite, called it 1 Up, didn't work, so he called it 2 Up, it didn't work, he called it 3 Up. Eventually he got to 6 Up and he gave up. So don't give up before you get kind of to the right, but I think there's almost a range in which you need to set yourself the right time frame. In our businesses now we set 2 years as opposed to 1 year as a sufficient amount of time. And it's interesting, no matter which business we've been involved in, whether it's stockbroking or wealth management or hedge funds, winning over clients and bringing in clients, no matter how quickly you think it's going to happen, somehow 18 months for us seems to be the first time that things actually start going smoothly. So we like to set 2 years as a time frame where if after 2 years you don't feel like you're actually making progress, cut it. And we budget for that. We prefer to spend more money in those 2 years than drawing it out and saying giving ourselves 3 or 4 years, because we're in such a fast moving world today. If you're not going to make it within the 2 years, I think the environment has changed, the opportunity is gone, and so that's a very esoteric thing in our world and our business, but we do set a very strong time frame. The mistakes we've made in many of our businesses, that I said, you know, our mistakes outweigh our successes in some regards, or in number terms, is that we've tried things which in concept are fantastic, we think, and should work, but don't work, and we keep going another year and another year and another year. There's no business that I can tell you, there's no 7 Up story after a 6 Up that exists in our world. You get to a point where you kind of need to actually accept, move on and do something else. And I think part of the discipline is if you can have that in mind and know what deliverables you're setting for yourself within a reasonable time frame, have the discipline to actually stick to that and, you know, switch off at the end. We've got one business now. We started it 14 months ago. We've given it 2 years. We're going to have a real hard look at 18 months and say, guys, are we ready? We all like each other a lot. We love this thing to succeed. The money's there. It's available. Let's not make a mistake of kind of dragging it out. If after 18 months we know it's not going to work, cut and get out.